It has to be swift and serious. We have to make a statement that girls in South Park aren't going to be treated like afterthoughts anymore. Yeah!
Yes! We are all different! I'm not.
I'm not gonna lie, I knew I wasn't going to enjoy this. I kept putting this off so long, I even got into making manga reviews. Well then, this is my Season 20 retrospective. Hope you enjoyed more than I did writing it. Welcome, dear all, to Friendly Faces Everywhere. It is a truth universally acknowledged that South Park's 20th season was not its best one. And sadly, I as well would place it among some of my least favourite storylines. I remember a time when I thought this could never be the case. After all, I have been wishing for South Park to try serialization for a while now. It seemed to have worked in little bits during Season 18 and 19, but Season 20 has fallen apart to the point that the finale was called the end of serialization as we know it. And yet, whenever people tell me that Trey and Matt should abandon the serialized format altogether, I can't help but strongly oppose that opinion. Of course the quality of the storytelling has dropped. After writing little more than standalone sitcom episodes for more than 17 years, of course trying something new was going to result in mistakes. Even over the course of a few seasons, they weren't suddenly going to excel at it. I think the negative reception of serialization in South Park from its viewers is very harmful. Not only does it make Trey less inclined to try new things and improve as a writer, but it also ignores many advantages of the format, like having the time to tell a bigger story, putting spotlight on characters that without it may not have been able to reach the same level of importance. Bottom line, I would say it's not the format's fault that the season was subpar. Mostly anyway. Why then? Let's dive into the troll election arc and find out. First of all, I don't want to be completely unfair to this season, so here are a few things I like, in no particular order. Nicole having her name confirmed as Daniels. The first scene of the season premiere. Although it still features the girls as a crowd rather than separate characters, it promises they will be more important, even though it only partially delivers on that promise. Heidi quitting Twitter giving birth to an actually funny scenario. Believe it or not, Hyman had been a very popular ship among the fandom, even before Season 20. But the way it starts in the show is quite funny, and honestly the best way I've seen it introduced into the story. Sorry, John. Gerald's trolling habits stemming from his Yelp reviews. Gerald's reveal of being the troll as an effective surprise. Between kicking Butters in the balls in the list and duking it out with him in douche and Danish, Nelly possibly being established as one of the girls who's most comfortable at doing the fighting. Cartman and Butters basically swapping personalities in OGs, being a consistent continuation of the character arcs from the previous seasons. Cartman having something tangible to lose, Heidi as a girlfriend, is a nice way to raise the stakes without him having to hog the spotlight all the time. Even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, which we will get to later. Cartman having a girlfriend being the thing that breaks Kyle. Dr. Tom, a very minor character from the earliest seasons, actually having a speaking role after all these years. Coincidentally, the only other time he was prominent also included him giving Garrison a makeover. Garrison having his parents' pictures on the wall of his house. Cartman finding Butters a threat in his love life as a good idea in theory. Sheila being somehow tied into the plot, albeit in a very minor role and mostly as a motivation for Gerald. Gerald commenting on Carl taking after his mother in his seriousness and outrages, which I always have been saying is logical evolution for him. Troll traces details about Ike, including him still being friends with Fillmore Anderson, googling Undertale and sending an email to Santa. The performance of Laura Tucker's actress, Elise Gabrielle, or one of them at least, she and Mona Marshall do seem to switch here and there. In any case, Gabrielle's desperate rage and goading Sheila to check on her husband, it's some of the best acting I've seen in South Park full stop. As mentioned before, Season 20 is one continuous storyline made up of numerous different subplots. Let's begin by discussing them separately. As you may remember, Season 19 left me pretty optimistic for the future, and the storyline that I looked forward to being continued the most was the 2016 election. In retrospect, it seems that Garrison replacing Trump as the presidential candidate ultimately failed in execution, while being an excellent idea in concept. Trey and Matt couldn't possibly hope to gain a niche in the field of political satire, with the likes of Stephen Colbert, John Oliver or Trevor Noah mocking the current president on a daily or weekly basis. Thus, using an already established character with heavy conservative leanings was an opportunity to not only mock Trump indirectly in a very special way, but also as an exploration of a character who has been forgotten ever since the first seasons of the show. The problem was, Matt and Trey never saw this as an opportunity for character growth, since they don't tend to do character stuff unless accidentally. Instead of taking time to analyze Garrison's past, how it ties into his bigotry, how he would work as President Garrison, we still have President Trump, just with Garrison's voice and design. He does nothing different than what Trump usually does, or at least the show treats the satire the same way as if it were just Trump, and so there's no point in it being Garrison in the first place. While I appreciate the subversiveness of Garrison trying to escape the election, it has an irritating side effect of self-awareness making Trump sympathetic. The main problem may be that while Matt and Trey were hoping that Garrison would be an apt enough parody of Trump, while not giving the annoying orange itself the satisfaction of being on the show, even if he had already appeared there once, they are very, very different people. To make matters worse, with each new scandal on the latter's part, it was becoming clear that Trump was way more depraved, stupid and morally lacking than Garrison could ever hope to be. Every little thing Trump would do every single day was a greater parody of himself than what Trey could write for Garrison without him appearing out of character. Perhaps one of the most disappointing starts of the season stems from the fact that Trey and Matt decided to stick to the douche and turd metaphor. To those unfamiliar, it comes from the episode of the same name, and means that basically whoever you vote for doesn't matter in the slightest, and it totally isn't a lazy nihilistic attitude that dissuades you from just, looking into the candidate's policies. Because nothing about the 2016 election is any different from typical US politics, eh? As if being a moderate wasn't the easiest bloody thing ever. I used to write similar kind of satire of, "Politicians are all the same, nothing matters, lol." I really did, when I was 12. And the strangest thing doesn't seem to be the neutrality that they ultimately seem to regret, but the weird direction the satire seems to go. It's as if they didn't really know what to do. For example, in Douche and Turd, the Republican candidate was a turd sandwich, while here it's Clinton who dons that nickname. But this is just a minor thing. In the third episode, The Damned, Garrison setting up Clinton's victory in the debate is undermined by her just repeating, "My opponent is a liar and cannot be trusted." What is even the satire here? During the campaign, I've heard many complaints about Clinton. She's just as evil and conniving as Trump, she's manipulative, out of touch, inaccessible, cold. But I've never once heard she was dumb. What the hell is the point of making her private baldrick? What is the thought behind the joke? Then, on the voter side, you have Randy and Stephen flip-flopping between votes, while in reality the disparity between the conservative and liberal bases is growing further apart than ever. Just listen to this.
Why does everything suck this hard? I don't know. Nobody knows what to think anymore.
No, they do know what to think. People are far too sure of the validity of their beliefs than they should be, and they certainly were during the election. South Park's usual style of satire is that every fad, trend or reaction is turned up to a ridiculous degree, but here what you're parodying doesn't reflect reality at all. Did you even pay attention to the population's reactions, or are you just basing it off of yourselves being third-party voters? How do you live? Later on in the story, we see that Garrison's character arc basically hinged on Clinton winning, and Herbert himself dealing with coming back to South Park Elementary to act as a teacher once again. When he does win, everything turns to shit. His character changes in an instant in episode 7, as he seems to be controlled by the member berries. The exact nature of this control is uncertain, as one episode he seems to be brainwashed, and in another it looks like he's back to his former self. The Season 20 commentary, which I do recommend giving a listen to, seems to suggest that at some point Trey and Matt were preoccupied with the similarity between their and Trump's provocateurism, which turned out to be a question then they didn't exactly find an answer to. The most accurate comparison they made in this plot thread was probably the relationship between Garrison's popularity and the theme of nostalgia, and even that could be confusing at times. In episode 6, Fort Collins, Garrison makes an appeal for voters to vote against him if they think the new Star Wars films was good, paying off the recurring J.J. Abrams joke. When I first watched For Collins, I thought, okay, do you want some people who did like The Force Awakens to vote for Trump? You do realise the huge influence you hold over your audience, right? Or are you just leaning on your chair with a glass of wine and laugh as you watch everything turn to shit? Also, something that's hilarious in hindsight is that by and large, conservatives hate the new trilogy. Who would have thought familiar stories with a more inclusive cast would turn off the bigots, eh? I suppose that now we have no choice but to discuss... member berries. Sorry, but the oversaturation of the bloody meal on the South Park Twitter made me rather sick of it quickly into the season. By the way, every single season they come up with a new forced phrase that they appear to hope will catch on as a meme. Have you noticed that? Doesn't only seem really obnoxious to me. So with the new season of South Park all but proclaiming that the age of subtle satire is non-existent and that they are the only ones who know how to do it, I've got to congratulate Matt and Trey on their completely non-transparent symbolism. Absolutely. Why only those with exceptionally high perceptive skills will read the fact that they are the metaphor for the regressive nostalgia of the conservative 80s, Reagan's government, and at the same time numerous franchises prevalent at the time and resurfacing during present day, all perceived as a quaint simpler time that most of the population wishes they could relive, and that's why they wanted to elect Trump. Oh, what's that? This analogy is as obvious as the fact that Matt and Trey don't want to accept the responsibility for making casual bigotry seem cool, edgy, and attractive to the young generation, despite whatever their intentions may be, and that they wish to have a convenient scapegoat and switch the blame to nostalgia personified, and the fact that audiences demand return of already familiar franchises and sequels, since serialization allows for better, more natural storytelling by giving the writing more time, but that's something outside of their comfort zone, so they drop it altogether after just attempting one season. Well, I never would have guessed. So yeah, I didn't care for the member berries. They were irritating, intrusive, not very subtle, and superfluous to the plot. They never really go anywhere, they start as the things that get Garrison elected, and end up the things that get Garrison elected. Every minute I spend with them on screen, I feel like I'm wasting my time. And that's the appeal of serialization, that you have more time to tell your story. Do you have a more complex story to tell, or do you just want serialization for the sake of serialization? The problem is not serialization in itself, but rather the fact that Trey is still writing in mind for a 20-minute episode while having 200 minutes at his disposal. And speaking of writing, Member Berries and the J.J. Abrams gag were just dripping with Trey's pride of his own writing, like here.
Membering is so much more fun than thinking.
Oh, right. Just like random callbacks from the earlier seasons is much easier than establishing a proper continuity in your series. Right, just checking. Christ, you can't even decide if member berries can be killed or not. You've got no right to lecture other people about writing. Around episode 6, Garrison and Randy embark on the quest to destroy the member berries. They try fire, acid, and nothing works. Meanwhile, in episode 4, that one guy just crushes it in his pocket. And later, then, they change their minds once again, since apparently a member berry gang plans to kill another member berry. Christ, I don't know what that came from. And wait a minute. Here the member berry's blood is red, here is green, and here is purple. What is even up with this? And as mentioned before, perhaps the most irritating thing about the member berries is that they serve as a scapegoat for Matt and Trey, while they don't want to admit their own influence over their audience, who they've been riling up against political correctness, while not really understanding what the concept of it means. That the years of using bigotry as the source of laughter, while never fully intended, help normalize bigotry to the point that a troll may just say something unabashedly racist or sexist, and then just hide behind comedy if it incites a negative reaction. Does the phrase, "It's just a joke, bro," spring to mind? And this brings us to Gerald's subplot. Bloody hell, if a few years ago you had told me that Carl's dad would be the villain protagonist of the series, I would have laughed. I didn't laugh all that much this season, point being. From Trey and Matt's commentary, we find out that Gerald's subplot was the core idea from which the entire season was built around.
What happened is we basically had this idea that we've been kicking around with Vernon Chapman and Bill Hader, who we always work with on the show. And we'd always had this side project, kind of like, Book of Mormon was a side project for many years. We kind of had this side project that we thought, we didn't know if it was going to be a movie or a music, whatever it would become, we didn't know. But we would get together a lot and talk about this idea of a troll, a guy who was a horrible internet troll at night, but during the day was like a totally nice, family man who was hiding his identity as an internet troll.
Originally meant for a project outside of South Park, the idea appeared well woven into the series at first glance. Giving Gerald, a seemingly nice person in his offline life, a dark secret through which he was able to release all of his hidden aggression and thus live his normal life, was an interesting idea to be explored. Trying out character studies I'm always all for, and you can really see how Gerald would become the person he is. And again, using the trolls versus Danes metaphor worked well, with Gerald gaining fantasy-like troll features at points, meeting under the bridge and all. The problem arose when, apart from telling the story they wanted to tell, they also used Gerald as a parallel to their own provocative, as they themselves call it, writing. This isn't the first time this comparison is made.
Using those Syrian refugees was genius, bro.
Yeah, I would have never thought to use offensive imagery and outrageous stereotypes to provoke someone to open their eyes.
Once again, I can see where this comes from. Trey and Matt do tend to use techniques very similar to trolling, which the character of Dildo Schwaggins romanticizes, thinking they were always used for political reasons. As the creative duo have always said about the process of writing South Park, Gerald has never done it to get political. He was just doing it for the lulz. And by the way, we had like 4 scenes with Gerald saying just that, and Dildo repeating he doesn't believe it, and there's only so many times I can take this repetitive bullshit. But that's beside the point. The reason I thought Gerald's storyline took a wrong turn was because he's bloody irredeemable. Listen to this.
Like I did when I was a kid! Don't you remember being a kid and just calling someone a fag for no reason?
I remember being called a fag for no reason.
Gerald's satire, which I'm even struggling to call it that since all he does is put dick in people's mouths, punches down instead of up, which satire is supposed to do. And if this is a representation of what South Park is supposed to be, then I'm just ashamed of having ever liked it in the first place.
Wow, that seems kind of mean.
Oh, you don't say, Trey and Matt. You've discovered that trolling is mean. What bleeding geniuses you are. Alright, you could say, so what if Gerald is the mouthpiece? You could say that this is their self-reflection, that they are admitting the flaws, that deep down they harbor this inner ugliness that makes them no better than an ordinary troll. But is it though? Instead of genuine self-reflection, I just see desperation. I see actual, if inconsistent, efforts to make Gerald somewhat sympathetic, in comparison to first the trolls and then Bedrager. It seems like deep down Trey and Matt want to believe they aren't bad people, but it's not enough. In the end, Gerald comes back to his family with no more consequences than being greeted by a glare by both his sons. Is it that judgment that is supposed to be the karmic retribution? It doesn't seem to come into play at all during season 21, so I assume it's going to be forgotten, and Carl's dad will just be forgiven. Gerald hasn't learned anything from his inner conflict, since he was just consoled by Dildo, being told that edgy humor is just the way he deals with reality. Oh, how badly they want to be justified. Does this mean Trey and Matt have come to terms with their troll-like nature? Am I reading too much into this? Is this the scroty mark boogerballs all over again? It's interesting from an analytical perspective, but it doesn't make me like this story anymore. The worst thing, however, is that Gerald gets to fucking lecture Bedrager about when it's right and when it's wrong to troll. That apparently causing one person to commit suicide is forgivable in comparison to a widespread conflict. If Gerald is a mouthpiece in the end, then Trey's beliefs are way more totalitarian than I thought, as he's fine with sacrificing the life of an individual for the benefit of another, bar for the benefit of a bad joke no less. Not to mention the fact that apparently his most solid argument was, "I'm funny so that makes it okay." And this convinces me that the self-reflection I spoke of before wasn't enough. Trey still thinks his comedy is superior to others, not realizing how very, very subjective it can be. Everything has the potential to be funny, but nothing is universally funny or universally unfunny. Who is to decide what's funny or what isn't? And if someone should be that authority, then wouldn't it be called political correctness? Trey and Matt's supposed worst enemy? Gerald is an awful hypocrite and doesn't get framed as such, which makes the end of this storyline just plain unsatisfying. One more thing before we finish up this storyline. Trevor's axiom is not a real scientific thing, but there is a grain of truth to it. It doesn't make the troll any less of a dick, or the intentions of the reactionaries any less wrong. Just saying, both sides are to blame, it's all just douches and turds all over again, is an unbelievably lazy oversimplification. One more provocateur we need to discuss as we move over to the children's subplots of the gender war in South Park Elementary is of course Eric Cartman. As I've said, the relationship with Heidi has been a bit of a breath of fresh air, and I welcomed it with an open mind. But my complaints about this arc and this season are mostly things that didn't start out great at the beginning of the season and went to shit when Clinton didn't get elected, but were just kind of weird from the get-go. Flawed at the concept level, you might say. For instance, I find it hard to believe that when a political force is on the rise that allows you to be openly racist and sexist, he instead goes on with his adaptation to the PC principles regime, continued from his character arc in season 19. You could say that he's doing the smart thing, playing to both sides like the opportunistic wanker he is. But why does he panic when Garrison actually wins? He could turn this around. There is of course a very distinct possibility that his selfish and egotistical reason that we might expect him to have as a motivation is just the fact that he likes having a girlfriend and is willing to put his lifestyle choices aside for being with Heidi. Which frankly wouldn't still explain why he defended a woman's capability of being funny. The cynical side of me just presumes that Matt and Trey just use Cartman as a mouthpiece for whoever they don't like, hence him quoting the Ghostbusters review. By the by, I really don't see what the boys were expecting when they decided to destroy Cartman's stuff. He's got his mum wrapped around his little finger, he'd easily convince her to buy him another, even if she had to take a loan.
This is gonna be the best night ever!
But the writing behind Cartman wasn't as confusing as the writing behind Heidi, who now dons a new cap to further differentiate her from Kenny's little sister. However much I want to praise Trey and Matt for deciding on bringing an already established background female character to the limelight, like they did with Leslie, I have lots of problems with the character. She's now a sweet little girl with the usual South Park dash of the women are wiser trope, despite being portrayed as fairly mean-spirited in the episode Margarine. And while we certainly are given a few traits that do make her memorable, it comes off as well being episodic. After she commits Twitter suicide, her demeanor in the school appears a little ghostly, completed with a spooky voice, which I thought was a cool quirk to have, but then in the next few scenes we forget all about it. Emoji analysis is pretty interesting. I hope it's a trait we're going to stick with. Oh no, we hear none of it in season 21 despite it heavily focusing around Heidi's character arc? Gotcha. If I ever get to analysing season 21, you'll hear more examples of this. But perhaps the weirdest thing about Heidi is her amnesia. The fact that she acts like she hasn't known Cartman for ages. In Fort Collins, Cartman is afraid that Heidi will discover what a wanker to everyone he's been on social media when she sees his entire internet history. Also, this will reveal his hidden misogyny, specifically an email sent to Butters telling him that Ghostbusters sucked because women ruined it what? Hate to break this to you, Eric, but your twattery hasn't exactly been very subtle since you killed a kid's parents and make him eat them. People around town know what a sociopath you are, or at least they would if they weren't subjected to mass amnesia every week. You should at least know you're a manipulative bastard. You killed a dad seasons ago. And Heidi, I didn't feel the need to mention that up until now because I thought it was obvious, but... He called you Clitty Litter! Last season! To your face! That was the entire catalyst of the PC saga! How do you even forget this when you plan to have a relationship arc with Cartman and Heidi? How do you do that, Trey? You'd have to willfully forget these things!
So you totally believe me?
Of course. You've never given me a reason not to believe you, babe.
He killed your dad!
I'm sorry for this outburst, guys, but despite being a South Park fan for years, it irks me when people keep proclaiming how so excellent their satire is, when they can't even write a single story without bringing an iceberg worth of a shit continuity. When you want to write a satire without a consistent universe, why don't you just have an opinion talk show or whatever, or write standalone political sketches? I know you love South Park, but if you miss these details, why don't you have a continuity supervisor point out all the shit you don't know? Moving on to the gender war itself, even if I was a bit wary about how the creators might approach this subplot, I was partly looking forward to it since I knew the girls would have to be involved somehow. Thus, there was a real chance of getting to know them all as individual characters, not as a hive mind of sparkles. How did that line I quoted at the beginning go?
That girls in South Park aren't going to be treated like afterthoughts anymore.
Well, obviously, which is exactly why the entire conflict between boys and girls is presented exclusively from Butters and Carl's perspective. I mean, Heidi is something, even if she is just mostly motivation for Cartman. The rest, though? Their involvement this season, even Sheila's and Wendy's, is essentially bitches be crazy being the thing that makes liberal men fear women's reaction to A, the Garrison administration, or B, troll Trace allowing them to find out about their infidelities. It isn't exactly clear which one Bill Clinton means. His speech about a woman's scorn is every MRA nutjob's worst fear, and it wouldn't be so bad if I was sure he's not Trey and Matt's mouthpiece. By the way, equalizing him to Cosby? Lovely, innit? Oh, I'm sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. I was distracted by all the male characters' roles in this discussion about women's involvement in the story, which is perhaps the best metaphor for it. Or maybe a better one would be the sequence where the girls collectively break up with all the boys, perfectly showing the extent of their importance in the show, how they relate to boys. Let's see, you have Nicole and Token, that's nice, Stan and Wendy, oh whatever, isn't this like the 5th time they've broken up? Clyde and Lisa Berger, or probably Bebe? Francis and Nellie, Kevin and wait, Kevin and Red were together this whole time? Do you realize how old this ship was? They were in the background seasons of season 1 together, this is the best season ever! I apologize for this outburst of positivity, I can promise it won't happen again. But hey, the girls aren't the only ones that get shafted this year. Remember the time Stan used to not get involved in the town's latest fads? That being his defining character trait? Well, here's him joining Butters' little MRA group, and doing nothing the rest of the season. Hope you enjoy it! And yes, I'm completely aware that you can't put focus on everyone in one season. It's just for being a main character, I can't recall the last time Stan was an active participant in the plot. And speaking of Butters, who else should deliver the line that irks me the most here?
And then they make you think they're really smart, really funny. But they're only really smart, Elon.
Yeah. You see this? This was the moment where I couldn't find it in myself to enjoy this season of South Park anymore. What Butters said could be interpreted in a few ways. The worst case scenario? Butters is Trey and Matt's mouthpiece right now, which you could make a case against. Oh, he's a silly little boy, he doesn't know any better. Why would they make him their mouthpiece? Well, they've made Cartman their mouthpiece multiple times. But surely Trey and Matt couldn't believe such misogynistic load of bollocks. No, I just can't give Trey the benefit of the doubt when all the evidence points to the said misogynistic load of bollocks. After the death of Mary Kay Bergman, the original voice of most of the South Park female characters, Trey and Matt pretty much stop using female characters unless the plot specifically requires a female perspective. In other words, either Wendy is the center of attention, or no girl says a word at all. This is somewhat understandable given the circumstances of South Park's rapid production process. Given they usually make an episode within 6 days, I imagine it's not worth to have Mona Marshall or April Stewart drive over to the recording booth just to record a generic line or two for Red or Annie, where you could easily have Clyde or Craig say the same thing. The side effect of that was that, while in the first few seasons, South Park has quite a few female characters with very entertaining personalities, later on, and it was a very gradual process, women in South Park started to adopt the women are wiser trope, generally becoming the voice of reason whenever adults in South Park were in focus. The result being fewer entertaining female characters and less interaction between boys and girls in South Park in general. Even Sheila, who you might recall is very prominent in this season, for a long time was very silent and generic between this season and the time the movie came out. So with all this in mind, does the fact that Trey and Matt don't think female characters or women in general are funny really seem that unlikely?
You'll think the rover cars and roller coasters are really cute, but then you'll realize something. The other colonists all seem to be women.
Oh really now, Cartman? My word, a scene where all the characters are nearly just one gender? I can't possibly imagine that happening in South Park. Now let's watch all those nearly all-male scenes of the trolls, troll tracer employees, political aides, FBI agents, the South Park elementary boys, and townspeople, where although women appear more frequently, most of the time they don't speak. There. Much better than all that Mars crap in it. Finally, all the stories come together as Carl organizes an all-male troll attack on Troll Trace, which somehow produces enough energy, I'm not sure, to shut it down. Also drawing from the energy provided by Heidi with her emoji analysis in Elon Musk's SpaceX, which somehow destroys it, which I still don't get. Wasn't it the source of energy, not the recipient? In any case, everything results in a Michael Bay explosion, leaving SpaceX and Troll Trace alike a giant mess. Much like this season in general. Do I even need to sum this up? I would be lying if I said I found Season 20 bad in concept, but I hated it nonetheless. Interesting ideas and unexpected characters gaining the spotlight were drowned in a wave of confusing morals, desperate hypocrisy, and bad creative choices, like deciding on writing the finale basing on the results of the election. If it would really help your narrative, you should have just let Clinton become president in the show. If you really don't think women and comedy don't fit together, maybe you could have them participate in the last troll attack led by Kyle at the very least, proving Cartman and Butters' point wrong. If you really wanted to have Gerald represent you cutting yourselves off from the alt-right, maybe don't have him be such an unbelievably unfunny, irredeemable twat who drives cancer survivors to suicide. Which, by the way, what was the poignant satire that he was trying to make by statements like, "Why don't you kill yourself, you whore?" And lastly, if you want to make a serialized storyline, maybe don't waste it on fucking member berries. I know this is much more of a rant than last season. So before I sign off, I recommend you visit my friend JVM's written analysis on his blog. He makes much more poignant points than my irritated self could ever hope to. John is a cunt. Damn it, it's my stammer again. Continuous source of inspiration to me. This season has left a bad taste in my mouth, but part of me still wants to defend it against those who hate it for what I believe to be the wrong reasons. Storylines, still good. Bad writing, bad, alright? Still, I haven't been able to enjoy South Park on the same level as before, unfortunately. This season's turned me from a genuine fan of the show into a casual watcher. Well, one with an abnormal knowledge of its canon, but a casual nonetheless. Oh well, better put that lore to good use someday. See you in the Season 21 review, everybody. In like 3 years, something. Depends if people are interested. I knew I should have mentioned Yaoi somewhere in there, that's the thing that gets me 15,000 views.